The laughter in the room felt like a warm blanket. It was the kind of genuine, easy joy that filled a space clinging to the curtains and settling into the soft cushions of the sofa. From my corner, I watched my son Liam. He stood tall, his shoulders broader than I remembered, his smile a perfect echo of his mother's. He was holding a glass of champagne, and his other arm was wrapped securely around the waist of a wonderful young woman named Chloe. Her eyes, full of light, never strayed far from him. They were the center of this universe, a bright, burning star of youth and promise. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, Chloe's parents, were beaming. They were good people, you could tell instantly. The kind of people who kept a neat garden and remembered birthdays. Mrs. Hayes touched Liam's arm, her expression a mixture of affection and approval. "We are just so thrilled, Liam," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet hum of conversation. "Chloe has told us so much about you, but she left out how charming you are." Liam laughed, a sound that was both familiar and foreign to my ears. "The pleasure is all mine. You've raised an incredible daughter." "Well," Mr. Hayes said, puffing his chest out slightly, "we tried to give her a good foundation. A strong family is the most important thing, you know. A boy needs a good father to show him the way." He looked at Liam, his gaze kind and inquisitive. "Your father must be a very proud man." A flicker of something I couldn't name crossed Liam's face. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that smooth, confident smile. He took a sip of his champagne. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his answer. I felt a swell of pride in my chest, a foolish, hopeful beat in my heart. This was it. This was the moment he would point to me, the quiet man in the corner, and bridge the distance that had separated us for so long. He gestured vaguely with his glass. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot," he said, his voice steady and clear. Then he looked directly at Mr. Hayes, his smile never faltering. "But I wouldn't know. I grew up without a father." The words didn't just enter my ears. They struck me. A physical blow that knocked the air from my lungs and sent a cold shock through my entire body. The warm blanket of laughter was ripped away, leaving me exposed and shivering. The clinking glasses, the soft music, the gentle murmur of the party, it all dissolved into a deafening roar of silence. My son's smile remained a perfect polished mask, and behind it, I saw a stranger. The pride in my chest collapsed into a black hole of grief. In that bright, happy room, surrounded by people, my world fell completely and utterly apart. 3 days earlier, the world had been quiet. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the sanitation trucks always came on Tuesdays, their groaning hydraulics and the clatter of bins the only punctuation in my long, silent mornings. I sat in my favorite leather chair, a mug of black coffee warming my hands, and stared out the floor-to-ceiling window of my apartment. The city sprawled below a complex grid of steel and glass of lives intersecting in ways I no longer understood. I had designed some of those buildings. I had spent a lifetime understanding how structures stood, how foundations supported weight, how stress was distributed to prevent collapse. I had been a good architect. I knew how to build things that would last for centuries. The mail arrived with a soft thud through the slot in my door. It was usually just bills catalogs for furniture I didn't need and the occasional newsletter from the Architects Guild. I let it sit there for a while. In my life, routine had replaced purpose. The ritual of waiting, of letting the day unfold at its own deliberate pace, was a form of control, a way to keep the chaos at bay. Eventually, I got up and walked across the polished hardwood floor. My footsteps echoed in the minimalist space I called home. Everything was gray, black or white, clean lines, uncluttered surfaces, no photographs, no knickknacks, no ghosts. Among the junk mail was a thick cream-colored envelope. My name and address were written in elegant looping calligraphy. It felt heavy in my hand, important. I slid it open with my thumb, my heart giving a strange, unfamiliar flutter. Inside was an invitation. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes request the pleasure of your company at a dinner party to celebrate the engagement of their daughter Chloe to Liam Parker." Liam, my son, engaged. The words seemed to float off the page. I knew about Chloe, of course. Liam had mentioned her. He'd brought her by the apartment once a few months back for a brief, almost formal introduction. She was lovely, bright, warm with a kind smile that seemed to reach her eyes. She looked at Liam with such open adoration that it made something ache inside me. She was everything a man could want for his son, and I was the man who was his son's father. I read the invitation again. A dinner party. To meet the family. This wasn't a casual coffee. It was an official summons into a world I'd only observed from a great distance Liam's life. For years, our relationship had been a series of brief phone calls and stilted holiday meals. We operated under a fragile truce, a silent agreement not to discuss the past. We didn't talk about his mother. We didn't talk about the years after she was gone. We talked about his job, my retirement, the weather, safe topics, uncluttered surfaces, like my apartment. This invitation was a wrecking ball aimed at the quiet, orderly structure of my life. It was a demand for me to be more than just a name on a birth certificate. It demanded that I be a father. A wave of something akin to panic washed over me cold and sharp. I would have to sit at a table and make conversation. I would have to answer questions. I would have to pretend that we were a normal, happy family. But underneath the panic, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to sprout. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the chance I had been waiting for without even knowing it. A new beginning, a family event, a celebration, an opportunity to step back into my son's life, not as a shadow from the past, but as a part of his future. The thought was terrifying, and it was intoxicating. I placed the invitation on the clean, empty expanse of my granite countertop. It looked so small, and yet so monumental. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something other than the dull, persistent ache of grief. It was fear, yes, but it was tangled up with a desperate, burning hope. I had to go. I had to try. For Liam. For the memory of his mother, Sarah, who would have been overjoyed. Who would have planned the whole party herself, filling the house with flowers, and her brilliant, infectious laughter. The silence in this apartment was the loudest thing I owned. For one night, I wanted to escape it. I wanted to stand in a room full of life and feel like I belonged there. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling slightly as I dialed Liam's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice professional and a little rushed. "Hey," he said. "Liam, it's Dad." The word felt foreign on my tongue. I so rarely used it. "I got your invitation." "Oh, good." There was a pause. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard in the background. He was working. Always working. A part of me, the part that was a hypocrite, felt a pang of resentment. "It's wonderful news, son. Chloe is a wonderful girl. You're very lucky." "I know I am," he said, and for a moment the professional tone softened. I heard the genuine emotion in his voice, the love he felt for her. It was a beautiful thing. "I'd be honored to come," I said, my voice a little too formal. "Great, it's Friday at 7. I'll text you the address. I have it. It's on the invitation." "Right. Okay. Well, I've got to run. A meeting in 5. Of course," I said quickly. "I'll see you Friday then. See you Friday." He hung up. The line went dead, and the silence of the apartment rushed back in to fill the void. The conversation had lasted less than a minute, but it was a start. I looked at the invitation again. Friday at 7. I had 3 days to prepare. 3 days to build a bridge across 20 years of silence. I had no idea how. I was an architect who had forgotten how to build the most important structure of all. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and anticipation. I found myself pacing the apartment, stopping to stare out the window, my mind a whirlwind of memories. I saw Liam as a little boy, all knees and elbows with a gap-toothed grin. He used to follow me around my workshop, his small hands trying to imitate mine as I drew blueprints. He'd ask a million questions. "Why does that wall go there, Daddy? How does the roof stay up?" I had always had the answers for him then. I remembered Sarah. Her head tilted as she watched us, a soft smile on her lips. "You have a little apprentice, David," she would say. "Be careful. He's learning everything from you." Her words were a gentle warning then. Now they were an indictment. What had he learned from me in the end? He had learned about stress points and load-bearing walls. He had learned about ambition and dedication to one's work. And he had learned about absence. He had learned how a foundation can crack, how a structure, no matter how beautifully designed, can collapse into ruin. The day of the party, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I spent hours deciding what to wear, pulling out suits I hadn't touched in years. Everything felt either too stuffy or too casual. I was a stranger trying on costumes for a role I didn't know how to play, proud father of the groom-to-be. I finally settled on a simple, dark gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and a conservative blue tie. Anonymous. Safe. The most difficult part was choosing a gift. What do you give the son you barely know to celebrate the most important milestone of his life? A toaster. A set of crystal glasses. It all felt so impersonal, so hollow. I wanted to give him something that mattered, something that said all the things I couldn't put into words. In the back of my closet, tucked away in a dusty wooden box, was my old set of drafting tools. German-made steel, heavy and cool to the touch. The compass, the rulers, the pens, they were extensions of my own hands for over 30 years. They had built my career. They had built the life that I had for a time shared with Sarah and Liam. I took them out, polishing each instrument until it gleamed under the light. I found a beautiful new case for them online and had it delivered that afternoon. It felt right. It was a piece of me. A piece of the man I used to be, the father he once knew. It was an offering. A hope that he might see the man who had loved teaching his son how to draw a straight line, not the man who had walked away when the lines of their own lives became crooked and broken. As I drove to the Hayes' house that evening, the city lights blurred into long streaks of color. My hands were cold on the steering wheel. I was driving toward a life that had moved on without me, and I was terrified that I would be turned away at the door. Their house was on a quiet, tree-lined street. It was a beautiful old colonial with warm light spilling from every window. It looked like a home. It looked like everything my apartment was not. I parked the car and sat there for a long moment, the box with the drafting tools on the passenger seat beside me. I could still turn back. I could drive home to my silent, orderly world where there were no expectations and no chances of getting hurt. But then I thought of Chloe's smile and the brief, rare softness in Liam's voice when he spoke of her. They deserved a family. And Liam, whether he knew it or not, deserved a father. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car. I walked up the stone path, each step feeling heavier than the last. I rang the doorbell, and the sound was swallowed by the happy noise from within. The door swung open, and there was Liam. For a second, he looked surprised to see me, as if he hadn't really expected me to show. Then his social grace kicked in, and he smiled. "You made it," he said. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, my voice hoarse. I held out the gift. "This is for you, for both of you." He took it, his expression unreadable. "Thanks." "Come on in. Let me introduce you to everyone." He led me into the warmth and the light, into the heart of his new family. And for a little while, as I shook hands with kind strangers and accepted a glass of champagne, I let myself believe. I let the fragile hope in my chest grow. I watched my son, and I felt a father's pride. I let myself believe that a broken thing could be mended. I let myself believe right up until the moment he stood before his future family and erased me from his life with a single devastating sentence. Time seemed to bend and warp around Liam's words. The sentence hung in the air, an invisible shimmering thing of monstrous weight. For a moment, no one spoke. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes exchanged a look of pure confusion. Their kind, simple world view had no category for a statement like that delivered with a smile at a party meant to celebrate family. It was a glitch in the social matrix, a line of code that made no sense. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, even though I knew it was only a handful. I was the unnamed variable in my son's equation, the ghost at the feast. I stood frozen in my corner, my half-full champagne glass feeling as heavy as a block of concrete. The blood drained from my face. I could feel the heat of a blush that wasn't a blush, but the icy burn of humiliation. The load-bearing walls of my composure, so carefully constructed for this evening, crumbled to dust. It was Chloe who saved the moment. She was a natural at it, a master of emotional diplomacy. She gave a light, tinkling laugh, as if Liam had just told a clever, self-deprecating joke. "Oh, Liam," she said, squeezing his arm. "Don't be so dramatic." She turned to her parents, her smile reassuring and bright. "His father is right over there, the handsome, quiet one in the corner. He's just being modest." She winked in my direction, a desperate, brilliant signal. "Play along," it said. "Please just play along." But I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my tongue a leaden weight. I managed a weak, pathetic twitch of my lips that was supposed to be a smile. Liam didn't even glance my way. He simply continued his conversation with Mr. Hayes, smoothly redirecting the topic to football, a subject so universally safe, it was like a conversational fire extinguisher. The moment passed. The partygoers, sensing a strange current, but not wanting to be swept away by it, gratefully moved on. The murmur of conversation swelled again, filling the space Liam's words had cleared. But the warmth was gone. For me, the air in the room had turned thin and sharp. Every laugh felt like a judgment, every friendly glance a look of pity. I felt like a fraud, an imposter in a suit I didn't deserve to wear. I had to get out. I mumbled an excuse to the couple standing near me and made my way through the clusters of smiling people, my movements stiff and unnatural. I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I found refuge in a small, book-lined study off the main hall. The door was slightly ajar, and the room was dark and quiet. I slipped inside, closing it gently behind me, and leaned against the cool wood, my eyes squeezed shut. The muffled sounds of the party seemed a world away. Here in the dark, the truth of what had just happened could land. I grew up without a father. The words echoed in the silence of my mind. It wasn't just the public denial that hurt. It was the casual cruelty of it, the ease with which he had erased me. Had he practiced that line? Had he stood in front of a mirror perfecting the smile that would accompany my execution? The thought was a shard of glass in my gut. My mind reeled frantically, searching for a defense, for evidence to the contrary. I saw a flash of a memory, Liam, age 7, perched on my shoulders at a 4th of July parade. His small hands tangled in my hair, his squeals of delight a firecracker in my ear. I saw myself teaching him how to ride a bike, my hand steady on the back of the seat, running alongside him down the sidewalk until he wobbled into a future where he no longer needed me to hold on. I saw myself at his high school graduation, sitting in the bleachers, my chest tight, with a pride so fierce it felt like a physical pain. Was all of that nothing? Were those memories mine alone, invalid, because he had chosen to delete them? The architect in me, the man who believed in logic and reason, tried to analyze the statement. It wasn't literally true. I had been there. I paid the bills. I drove him to soccer practice. I lived in the same house. So, what did he mean? The answer was there, lurking just beneath the surface of my denial, a monstrous shape in the deep water of my guilt. He meant I wasn't present. I was a physical object in his life, a piece of furniture, but my heart, my mind, my soul, they were somewhere else. They were buried with Sarah. After she died, I hadn't just lost my wife. I had lost my ability to navigate the world. She had been my compass, my true north. Without her, I was adrift in an ocean of grief. And Liam, a little boy of 10, had been adrift in that same ocean, in the same small boat. But I had been too lost in my own storm to even see him. I had retreated into the one thing I could still control: my work. I built skyscrapers that touched the clouds because I couldn't bear to be on the ground, where her memory was, in every room, in every blade of grass, in my own son's face. I worked 16-hour days. I took business trips that lasted for weeks. I built a fortress of blueprints and deadlines around my broken heart, and I left my son outside the walls. I had told myself it was for him, that I was working to provide for him, to give him the future we had always planned. It was a lie, a convenient, self-serving lie. I was working to escape him because every time I looked at him, I saw her eyes. I saw the life we had lost. I saw my own colossal failure. I opened my eyes, the darkness of the study, a cold comfort. I had to talk to him. I couldn't let the night end like this with my existence hanging by the thread of a lie. I couldn't build anything on this foundation of rubble. Straightening my tie, I took a deep, unsteady breath and walked back out into the fray. The party was still in full swing. I scanned the room and found Liam standing by the French doors that led to the garden, talking to Chloe. Her hand was on his chest, her head tilted, and she was speaking to him in a low, earnest voice. She looked worried. As I approached, she saw me. She gave me a small, sad smile and discreetly excused herself, melting back into the crowd. She was giving us space. That girl was too good for us. Now it was just the two of us silhouetted against the dark glass of the doors. For a long moment, we just stood there. He didn't turn to face me. He just kept staring out into the night. "Hi, Liam." I started, my voice barely a whisper. He sighed a long, weary sound. "Don't," he said, "not here. I just have to ask you one thing." I pressed on the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Why? Why would you say that in front of them? In front of everyone?" He finally turned to look at me. The polite social mask was gone. His eyes, so like his mother's, were cold and hard. There were 20 years of resentment packed behind that gaze. "Why?" He repeated, his voice low and laced with a bitterness that startled me. "What did you expect me to say, Dad?" He spat the word dad like it was poison on his tongue. "Should I have told them the truth? Should I have introduced them to David Parker, the brilliant architect? The man who can raise a building from nothing but couldn't be bothered to raise his own son?" Each word was a precise, calculated blow. He was dismantling me piece by piece. "That's not fair." I stammered, my defenses worthless. "I was there. I took care of you." He let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in it. "Took care of me? You mean you paid the bills? You hired the housekeepers? You sent checks for summer camp? That's not a father, David. That's a bank. A foundation is not a home. A blueprint is not a family. You spent my entire childhood building your legacy out of concrete and steel, and you never once realized you were letting your own home crumble into dust." He took a step closer, and I could see the raw pain he had kept hidden for so long. "You want to know why I said it? I said it because it's the truth. My truth. I learned to tie my own ties. I learned how to talk to girls on my own. I figured out how to apply for college on my own. The most important man in my life was a ghost who occasionally showed up for dinner. So no," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "I didn't grow up with a father. I grew up in a house with a man who was supposed to be one." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet intensity of his words was more devastating than any shout. He had taken my entire life's work, my identity, the one thing I had been proud of, and turned it into the very weapon he used to destroy me. And the most terrible part was he was right. From his perspective, he was absolutely, unequivocally right. I had no answer, no defense, no explanation that wouldn't sound like a pathetic excuse. The grief and guilt I had carried for 2 decades rose up and choked me. I stood there mute and broken, a stranger in a suit, staring at the son I had lost so long ago, I couldn't even remember the way back to him. "Now, if you'll excuse me," he said, his voice once again smooth and controlled, as he saw Chloe approaching in the distance. "I have to get back to my fiancé. I'm trying to build something real here. Please don't ruin it." He turned and walked away, leaving me alone by the door. The reflection in the dark glass showed a man I barely recognized, old, hollowed out, and utterly defeated. I couldn't stay. I couldn't face Chloe's kind, worried eyes, or her parents' confused smiles. I found my coat, slipped out the front door without saying goodbye to anyone, and walked down the stone path into the cold night air. The gift I had brought, the polished drafting tools, sat on the table in the entryway, unopened, a meaningless relic from a man who didn't exist. As I drove away from that warm, bright house, away from the life my son was building for himself, I felt a finality I had never felt before. This wasn't just a fight. This was a verdict. A judgment had been passed down, and I had been sentenced to a life of exile. The hope I had so foolishly nurtured for 3 days was dead. In its place was a cold, hard certainty. I had not only lost my wife, I had failed my son so completely that he had written me out of his story. And I had no idea how to write myself back in. The days that followed the party were a return to the familiar gray. The silence in my apartment was no longer a choice. It was a sentence. Before it had been a quiet, I curated a minimalist defense against the noise of the past. Now it was a profound and crushing emptiness, a vacuum where the last remnants of hope had been. I'd walk from room to room, the polished floors reflecting a ghost. The city outside my window, once a testament to my life's work, now seemed to mock me. All those buildings full of people living, loving, fighting, and connecting, they were monuments to a kind of life I had failed to build for myself. My son's words had become the new architecture of my mind. A foundation is not a home. A blueprint is not a family. They were inscribed on every wall, etched into every window. I replayed our confrontation by the French doors 1,000 times. Each time I tried to formulate a different response, a perfect combination of words that would explain, apologize, and mend, but every imagined speech died on my lips, turning to ash. What could I say? I'm sorry, son. I was drowning, and I forgot you were in the water with me. It was the truth, but it sounded like an excuse, and Liam was done with excuses. I tried to reach out. It was a pathetic fumbling attempt. I called him 2 days after the party. The phone rang and rang, each tone a small, sharp jab to my anxiety, before finally clicking over to voicemail. Liam, it's David. I said the word dad, now too presumptuous to even attempt. I wanted to talk. Please call me back. He never did. A week later, I sent a text message. Thinking of you. Hope you and Chloe are well. The little delivered notification appeared beneath it, a stark confirmation that my message had crossed the digital space and landed in his pocket, only to be ignored. There was no read receipt. He had turned that feature off for me, I realized. Another small, deliberate act of severing. Another brick in the wall he was building between us. My attempts were clumsy because I was out of practice. I had spent 20 years communicating with my son through the sterile medium of duty. I sent checks for tuition. I remembered his birthday with a card that had more money in it than sentiment. I had fulfilled the obligations of a father without ever embracing the role. Now faced with the need for real emotional connection, I was like a man trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer. All I could do was cause more damage. It was Chloe who finally broke the silence. She called me on a Thursday afternoon. Her voice was hesitant but warm, a small island of kindness in my sea of isolation. Hi, David. It's Chloe. Chloe, I said, my voice thick with disuse. It's good to hear from you. I wanted to see how you were doing, she said. We missed you after you left the party. It was a gentle probe, an offer of an olive branch. I'm sorry about that. I said, the shame of that night fresh in my mind. I wasn't feeling well. There was a pause on her end, a beat of understanding. She knew it was a lie, but she was kind enough to let it stand. Well, I hope you're feeling better. Listen, the reason I'm calling is... Liam and I are starting to go through some of the things in his old storage unit, to consolidate before the wedding. There's a lot of stuff from his childhood in there. I was wondering if you'd like to come help us sort through it on Saturday. It might be nice for you to see it. The invitation was so transparently a setup, a well-intentioned attempt at mediation, that I almost smiled. This girl, this near stranger, was trying to do what I, his own father, could not. She was trying to build a bridge. The thought of it filled me with a complex mix of gratitude and profound inadequacy. I don't think Liam would want me there, I said honestly. Let me worry about Liam, she said, a new firmness in her voice. This isn't just about him, David. It's about building a future, and you're a part of his past, a part of him. It's important. Her words, you're a part of him, struck a chord deep inside me. Liam might have written me out of his narrative, but he couldn't erase the biological fact of me. He couldn't erase the memories, even if he'd bury them. Perhaps Chloe was right. Perhaps the only way forward was to go back. "Okay, Chloe," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Okay, I'll be there." The storage facility was a bleak, anonymous place on the industrial outskirts of the city. A maze of identical roll-up metal doors under a pale, washed-out sky. Chloe met me at the gate, offering a small, encouraging smile. Liam was already there, standing with his back to us, his shoulders tense. He was unlocking Unit 237. He didn't turn around when we approached. "Hey," Chloe said, brightly kissing his cheek. "Look who's here to help." Liam finally glanced at me. His expression was a carefully blank wall. "I thought we were just cleaning this out," he said to Chloe, his tone flat. The implication was clear. "Why did you invite him? We are," she said, ignoring his tone. "And your dad is helping?" "More hands make light work, right?" She handed me a pair of work gloves from her bag, a gesture that was both practical and symbolic. "You are part of this. Get to work." The metal door rolled up with a deafening screech, revealing a 10 by 10-foot cube packed to the ceiling with the archaeology of a life. Boxes, old furniture, a bicycle with flat tires. It was a time capsule of the sun I had lost track of. For a moment, the three of us just stood there, staring into the dusty abyss. The work began in a tense, suffocating silence. Chloe acted as a buffer, directing traffic with a cheerful efficiency that felt almost heroic. "Liam, can you get that big box in the back?" "David, maybe you can start with these smaller ones up front." I picked up the first box. The word school was scrawled on the side in my late wife's elegant handwriting. Sarah. Her presence was immediate, a sudden drop in temperature. I lifted the flaps. Inside were old report cards, art projects, and class photos. I pulled out a picture of a third-grade class. Liam stood in the middle row, a defiant little boy with a crooked smile and a missing front tooth. He was wearing a superhero t-shirt under his collared shirt. I remembered that shirt. He'd refused to take it off for a week. "I remember this," I said, my voice softer than I intended. I held the photo out. "You loved that shirt." Liam glanced at it, his face unreadable. "I was 8, he said, and turned back to the heavy box he was wrestling with. The wall was still up. We worked for what felt like hours. Each box opened was a potential landmine. A box labeled Sports held his first baseball glove, small and stiff, and a dusty collection of Little League trophies. I remembered sitting in the bleachers at those games, distracted, taking calls from the office on my bulky cell phone, only half watching as he rounded the bases. I had been there physically, but my mind was miles away, designing a new atrium for some downtown bank. Liam and I moved around each other in the small space with a strained, careful choreography, never making eye contact, never speaking directly. All communication was filtered through Chloe. "Chloe, where should this go? Chloe, is this trash, or keep?" We were 2 planets in a silent, miserable orbit around her sun. Then she found it. In a large plastic bin marked Sarah's Things, tucked beneath a pile of her old sweaters that still faintly smelled of her perfume, was a small, unassuming wooden box. It wasn't a memory box I recognized. It was simple, unadorned. Chloe lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of letters tied in faded silk ribbons, and on top, a single unsealed envelope with my name on it. David, written in Sarah's hand. "What is this?" Chloe asked, gently holding the box. Liam stopped what he was doing and stared at it. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had never seen that box before. Sarah had been a prolific letter writer to her friends and family, but she had never written letters to me. We lived in the same house. We shared the same bed. She talked to me? I don't know. I said, my voice strained. Chloe, with an instinct I couldn't fathom, picked up the single envelope. She didn't open it. She just held it out to me. "I think this is for you," she said. My hand trembled as I took it. The paper was soft-aged. It felt sacred. Liam watched me, his jaw tight, a flicker of something curiosity, apprehension in his eyes. I slid my finger under the flap. The letter was dated just 2 months before the accident, before the world ended. I unfolded the single sheet of paper and began to read. "My dearest David, I'm writing this because I don't know how to say it. It's strange, isn't it? We share a life, a home, a son, and yet lately I feel like we are 1,000 miles apart. You're here, but you're not. You come home from the office so late your mind's still full of blueprints and steel beams. You look at me, but I feel like you're looking right through me. You ask Liam about his day, but you don't really hear his answer. I know how important your work is to you. I have always been so proud of the beautiful things you create. But David, we are supposed to be your greatest creation, this family, this life, and I feel it slipping away. I feel like a ghost in my own home. Liam feels it too. He stopped asking when you'll be home for dinner. He just accepts that your chair will be empty. It breaks my heart. I am lonely, David. I am so terribly lonely. And I am scared. I'm scared of this distance between us, this quiet, polite chasm that gets wider every day. I miss my husband. Our son misses his father. Please come back to us before it's too late. All my love, Sarah. The letter shook in my hands, the words blurred through a sudden film of tears. This wasn't a letter from a woman who died in a sudden tragic accident. This was a letter from a woman who was already grieving a loss. The loss of her husband, the loss of her family. My guilt, which I had thought was a finite thing, a burden with defined edges, suddenly expanded to infinity. My narrative had always been, this our life was perfect, and then the accident destroyed it. But that was a lie. I saw that now. The destruction had started long before. I had been the one driving the bulldozer. The accident hadn't caused the fracture. It had just shattered a structure that was already broken. I looked up from the letter, my eyes finding Liam's. He was watching me, his expression a storm of conflicting emotions. He had seen the devastation on my face. He had seen me break. "What is it?" he asked, his voice rough. I couldn't speak. I just held the letter out to him. He hesitated for a moment, then took it from my shaking hand. He read it, his eyes scanning the page, his face growing paler with every line. I watched him process the words of a mother he idolized, a mother whose memory he had protected with a fierce and righteous anger directed squarely at me. But this letter changed the story. It showed him that his mother's pain, her loneliness didn't start with her death. It started with my absence. It confirmed everything he had ever felt, but it came from her, not from him. It was a voice from the grave, validating his entire life's grievance. He finished reading and looked at me. The cold wall of anger in his eyes was gone. In its place was something far more terrifying. It was a profound, bottomless sorrow. The shared sorrow of two people who had both failed the woman they loved most. The silence in that dusty storage unit was absolute. It was the sound of a foundation cracking of a truth so heavy it threatened to bring everything crashing down. The letter was a confession, a verdict delivered from the past, written in the hand of the one person whose judgment mattered most. It lay on the dusty floor between us, a fragile piece of paper holding the weight of 2 decades of unspoken truths. Liam didn't look at me. He just stared at the letter, as if he could unread the words, as if he could push this new, more complicated truth back into the envelope and seal it away forever. The narrative he had built his anger upon, the simple story of a good mother and an absent father, had just been complicated by his mother's own testimony of loneliness. The villain of his story was still me, but now the story had a prologue he never knew existed. Chloe, bless her heart, seemed to understand that the air in the room had become too thin to breathe. She moved slowly, deliberately, and began placing the lids back on the boxes we had opened. The soft scrape of cardboard on cardboard was the only sound. "I think," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "that's enough for one day." She looked at Liam, then at me. "Why don't we all go get some lunch? My treat." It was a kind, impossible offer. The thought of sitting across from Liam at a table trying to make small talk over sandwiches, while the raw, exposed nerves of our family history lay twitching between us, was unbearable. Liam must have felt the same. He shook his head, a small, jerky movement. "I'm not hungry." He mumbled, his voice hoarse. He finally looked up, not at me, but at Chloe. "I think I just want to be alone for a bit." His gaze was lost, haunted. He looked like the 10-year-old boy I remembered from the hospital, the boy who had just been told his mother was gone. A child suddenly unmoored from everything he had ever known. I had failed that boy then, retreating into my own grief. I couldn't do it again. Liam? I started taking a half step toward him. No, he said, cutting me off. The word was sharp, a shield thrown up instantly. He held up a hand. Just, not right now. I can't. He turned and walked out of the storage unit, leaving the door wide open, and disappeared down the long, identical corridor, his footsteps echoing until they were gone. I stood there, helpless, watching the empty space where my son had been. I had come here hoping for a bridge, but instead we had unearthed a chasm. Chloe came and stood beside me. She put a comforting hand on my arm. Her touch was warm and steady. Give him time, David, she said softly. This is a lot to process, for both of you. He hates me. I whispered the words, tasting like poison. And he's right to. The letter, it just proved him right. No, she said, her grip tightening slightly. It didn't prove him right. It just showed him that the story is more complicated than he thought. He's not just angry anymore. Now he's grieving. He's grieving for the mother he thought was happy. And he's grieving for the childhood he lost. It's different. She was so wise for her age. She could see things with a clarity that both Liam and I had lost long ago in the fog of our own pain. She was right. The letter hadn't absolved me, but it had shifted the dynamic. It had moved the conflict from a simple courtroom drama of blame and accusation into a shared space of sorrow. I didn't know if that was better or worse. In the weeks that followed, the silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence. It was no longer the cold, hard silence of rejection. It was a heavy, thoughtful silence, a silence full of unspoken things. Liam didn't answer my calls, but he didn't need to. I knew he was wrestling with the same ghosts that I was. I retreated into my apartment, but not to hide. For the first time, I began to truly confront the past, not as a series of painful memories to be avoided, but as a case study to be analyzed. I, the architect, began to excavate the ruins of my own life. I pulled out old photo albums, things I had boxed up and hidden away because they were too painful to look at. There she was, Sarah, laughing on a tire swing, asleep on the sofa with a book on her chest, holding a tiny infant Liam in her arms, her face a perfect portrait of awe and love. And there I was beside her younger, happier a man I barely recognized. But as I flipped through the years, I saw the subtle shift. The photos of me became less frequent. When I was in them, I was often in the background, slightly out of focus, or looking off to the side, my mind already at the office. The camera, wielded by Sarah, had captured the truth I had refused to see. It had documented my slow, inexorable retreat from my own family. I found a picture of Liam's 10th birthday party. It was the last one Sarah ever planned. The party was at our house, the backyard full of rambunctious kids. I wasn't in a single photo. I had been in Tokyo for a conference. I'd called and spoken to him, promised I'd make it up to him. I never did. 2 months later, Sarah was gone. The day of the accident played in my mind on a continuous, brutal loop. It was a Friday. I was supposed to leave work early to pick Liam up from school and take him to a father-son campout his scout troop was having. It was the makeup for missing his birthday. At the last minute, a crisis erupted at a downtown construction site. A subcontractor had made a massive error in the foundation pour. It threatened to set the entire project back by months. My project, my legacy. I can't get away. I had told Sarah over the phone, the stress making my voice sharp. You'll have to get him. I'm sorry. I could still hear the sigh on the other end of the line. The sound of a hope being extinguished. Okay, David. She had said, her voice flat with a resignation I was too self-absorbed to recognize as despair. I'll handle it. I always do. Those were the last words she ever said to me. I'll handle it. She had left in a rush, trying to get to the school before the last bell, trying to make sure her son wasn't the last one left waiting. The police said a truck ran a red light. They said it was instantaneous, but I knew the truth. The chain of events that led to her death began with my phone call. It began with my choice. Work over family, a building over my son. This was the truth I had to face. This was the foundation of Liam's anger. It wasn't just that I was absent after she died. It was that my absence was the very reason she had died in the first place. This was the core of my guilt, the black, dense secret I had never even admitted to myself. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't fix the past. I couldn't bring her back. But I had to take responsibility. I had to confess. Not to be forgiven, but to finally tell the whole, unvarnished truth. I owed that to Liam. I owed it to Sarah's memory. I called Chloe. I need to see him. I said, my voice raw. I need to talk to him. It's important. She must have heard the change in my tone, the grim resolve. She didn't argue. He's at our new apartment, she said, giving me the address. He's painting the living room. Just be gentle, David. The drive over was surreal. The city seemed sharper, the colors more vivid. I felt a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes when you have finally decided on an unavoidable, terrifying course of action. I was going to detonate a bomb in the middle of my son's life, and I had no idea what would be left standing in the aftermath. But hiding from the truth was no longer an option. Their new apartment was in a bright, modern building in a younger, more vibrant part of town. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. The living room was a chaotic mess of drop cloths, paint cans, and rollers. And in the middle of it all was Liam. He was wearing old paint-splattered jeans and a t-shirt. He had a streak of pale blue paint on his cheek. He was on a stepladder, carefully cutting in the edge where the wall met the ceiling. He didn't hear me come in over the sound of the music playing from a small speaker in the corner. For a moment, I just watched him. I saw not the angry man from the party or the lost boy from the storage unit, but a young man building a life. A young man trying to create a home, painting the walls with the color of hope, and I was about to splatter them with the mud of the past. "Liam," I said. He flinched, startled, and turned around on the ladder. His face hardened when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice hostile. "I told you I needed space." "I know," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm sorry to intrude, but I have to tell you something. Something you have a right to know." He slowly climbed down from the ladder, wiping his hands on a rag. He crossed his arms over his chest, a defensive posture. "I think I've heard enough," he said. "The letter said it all." "No," I said, shaking my head. It didn't say everything." I took a deep breath, the air burning in my lungs. "It didn't tell you about the phone call?" He frowned, confused. "What phone call?" And so I told him. I stood there in the middle of the life he was trying to build, and I confessed my greatest sin. I told him about the camping trip. I told him about the crisis at the construction site. I told him how I was supposed to be the one to pick him up from school that day. I told him how I had chosen my work over him, over her. She was only in that car at that intersection at that exact moment because of me. I said, my voice finally breaking. The words I had kept locked inside for 20 years were finally out, and they were devastating. I was supposed to be there. It should have been me. I had expected anger. I had expected him to yell, to rage, to finally unleash all the fury he had stored up for a lifetime, but he didn't. He just stood there, his face ashen, his arms falling limply to his sides. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. He wasn't just seeing his absent father anymore. He was seeing the man who had, by a single selfish decision, sent his mother to her death. He stumbled back a step, as if my words were a physical force pushing him away. He shook his head, denial warring with the awful, undeniable logic of what I had said. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not. It was an accident." "It was a choice," I corrected him, my voice flat and dead. "My choice. I have lived with that every single day for 20 years, Liam, and you had a right to know why. You had a right to know the whole truth. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide, with a pain so profound it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He had hated me for his loneliness, for my emotional abandonment. But this was a new, monstrous thing. This was a betrayal that transcended absence. This was about existence itself. And then the anger came. It wasn't loud. It was a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from the very core of his being. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw pure, undiluted hatred in my son's eyes. "Get out," he said, his voice a raw, ragged whisper. "Liam, I said get out," he roared, the sound exploding in the empty apartment, echoing off the newly painted walls. He pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Get out of my house. Get out of my life." He took a breath, his chest heaving, his face contorted with a grief and fury that was terrifying to behold. "Don't call me," he choked out. "Don't text me. Don't you dare show up at my wedding." He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze stripping away any last shred of our connection, severing the final tie. "Don't call me Dad anymore. You lost that right a long time ago." He turned his back on me, his body shaking with silent sobs. The confrontation was over. I had told the truth, and the truth had not set me free. It had utterly and completely destroyed the last fragile possibility of a future with my son. I had lost him once to grief and neglect. Now I had lost him for good to the truth. All was lost. I don't remember driving home. The city, with its sharp lines and brilliant lights, was a blur of meaningless shapes and colors. My mind was a white-out blizzard of my son's final words. "Don't call me Dad anymore." It was a definitive, soul-crushing verdict. Not a plea, not an angry outburst, but a final judgment. The door to his life, which had been closing slowly for 20 years, had just been slammed shut, bolted, and barricaded. The following weeks were a descent into a kind of purgatory I hadn't known existed. The quiet of my apartment, once a sanctuary, became a torture chamber. Every silent moment was filled with the echo of Liam's roar, the image of his face twisted in a mask of ultimate betrayal and pain. I had thought I'd hit bottom the night of the party, but I was wrong. That was just the crumbling of the facade. This was the collapse of the foundation itself. There was nothing left beneath my feet. I stopped leaving the apartment. Groceries were delivered. The mail piled up by the door unopened. I sat in my leather chair for hours, sometimes days, staring at the city I had helped build, feeling like a god surveying a world from which he has been exiled. I had created structures meant to withstand time, wind, and the stresses of the earth. But I couldn't withstand the weight of my own truth. Sleep was a luxury I was no longer afforded. When I did drift off, my dreams were haunted. I was back in the car with Sarah the day of the accident. Only this time, I was behind the wheel. The truck was coming, a huge, unstoppable force of metal, and I couldn't move, couldn't turn, couldn't scream. Other nights, I was 10 years old again, standing in a schoolyard, watching all the other boys get picked up by their fathers, a growing knot of dread in my stomach. I would wake up with my heart pounding, drenched in a cold sweat, the grief and terror of my own son's childhood somehow imprinted on my soul. My phone remained silent. I didn't try to call. He had made his wishes brutally clear. The severance was complete. I imagined him and Chloe moving forward with their wedding plans, picking out flowers, tasting cakes, creating a future that had a gaping, father-shaped hole in it. The thought was a physical pain, a constant, dull ache in my chest. Had I done the right thing by telling him? The question circled my mind like a vulture. I had told myself it was about truth, about his right to know. But was there a darker, more selfish motive? Had some part of me wanted to share the unbearable burden of my guilt, to force him to carry it with me? The possibility that my confession was just another act of selfishness was the most damning thought of all. It was Chloe who reached out a lifeline thrown into my self-imposed darkness. It had been nearly a month since I had seen Liam. Her name on my phone screen sent a jolt of both hope and terror through me. David, Her voice was strained, tired. "Chloe," I managed to say. Is everything all right?" She let out a long, weary sigh. "No, David. No, it's not all right." She paused, and I could hear the hesitation, the careful choosing of words. "He's not okay. He's broken. He goes to work. He comes home. He helps with the wedding plans, but he's a shell." The light is gone from his eyes. "He won't talk about it. He won't talk about you. If I even mention your name, he just shuts down completely." I closed my eyes, the image of my vibrant, confident son replaced by the hollowed-out man she was describing. "I did this," I whispered. "I broke him." "You told him the truth." She corrected me, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Maybe it's a truth he needed to hear. I don't know anymore. But what I do know is that this hatred he's carrying around, it's poisoning him. It's poisoning us. We fight all the time about stupid things. The real reason we're fighting is standing right between us, and we can't even name it." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I realized with a fresh wave of guilt that I hadn't just destroyed my son. I was destroying his chance at happiness, the very thing I had claimed to want for him. "The wedding is in 3 weeks, David," she continued, her voice regaining a sliver of its strength. "And I'm scared. I'm terrified of marrying a man who is so full of ghosts. I love him, but I can't build a future on a foundation of rage. I can't spend my life with a man who can't forgive." She paused. "Or a man who can't forgive himself." Her last words were aimed at me, a perfect, precise shot to the heart. She wasn't just talking about Liam, she was talking about me too. We were two sides of the same broken coin, a son who couldn't forgive his father and a father who couldn't forgive himself. And in the middle was this incredible woman trying to hold the pieces together. "What do you want me to do, Chloe?" I asked, my voice full of a desperation I didn't try to hide. "He won't see me. He won't speak to me. I've been erased." "I don't know," she admitted, and for the first time she sounded as lost as I felt. "I just thought you should know." "I thought you should know what your truth has done." She hung up, leaving me in a silence that was heavier and more profound than ever before. Her words replayed in my mind. I can't build a future on a foundation of rage. The architect in me seized on the metaphor. It was the one language I still understood. A foundation. The base upon which everything is built. If the foundation is compromised, the entire structure is at risk of collapse. Liam's foundation was rage. Mine was guilt. Both were unstable. Both were toxic. For days, I did nothing. I was paralyzed. What action could I possibly take? Every move I had made had only made things worse. But Chloe's desperation, her fear for her own future, was a catalyst. I couldn't let my failure destroy her life as well. I had to do something. Not for me, not even for Liam, but for her, for the hope of the future she represented. The idea came to me not in a flash of inspiration, but as a slow, dawning realization. I couldn't take back my words. I couldn't undo the past. But maybe, just maybe, I could change the landscape of the present. I had to get out of my apartment. I had to go back to the beginning. The drive was long, nearly 2 hours out of the city, to a place I hadn't seen in 20 years. The scenery changed from the hard angles of skyscrapers to the soft rolling hills of the countryside. I was driving on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind a blank slate. I knew the route by a primal instinct, a muscle memory buried deep in my subconscious. I finally pulled over on the shoulder of a quiet country road. The place was unremarkable. A curve in the road, a stand of old oak trees, a rusty guardrail. There was no monument, no cross, no sign that this was a place where a life had ended and 2 others had been irrevocably broken. This was the spot. The place where Sarah's car had been hit. Getting out of the car, my legs felt unsteady. The air was fresh and clean, full of the scent of damp earth and new leaves. It was so peaceful, so grotesquely, horribly peaceful. I walked to the guardrail, its paint peeling, and looked down into the shallow ditch where her car had come to rest. I had never been back here. Not once. I had seen the police photos, read the reports, but I had never been able to bring myself to stand on this ground. It was the epicenter of my failure, the origin point of all my pain. And now, standing here, I don't know what I expected. A final crushing wave of grief, a ghostly apparition. But there was nothing, just the whisper of the wind through the trees and the quiet hum of a distant tractor. The world had moved on. The grass had grown back. Nature had done what I could not. It had healed the scar on the landscape. But it hadn't healed me. The wound was still wide open, still bleeding. And I realized, standing on that sacred, terrible ground, that I had never truly mourned. I had grieved, yes. I had been consumed by guilt. But I had never simply mourned the loss of my wife. My partner, the love of my life. My grief had always been tangled up with my own culpability, my own self-loathing. I had never allowed myself the clean, pure pain of simply missing her. And so I did. I let go. I leaned against the guardrail, the rusty metal cool against my hands, and I let the dam of my composure so meticulously maintained for 20 years finally break. I sobbed, not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that tore through my body, racking my frame. I cried for her, for the laughter I would never hear again, for the future she would never see, for the grandchildren she would never hold. I cried for the vibrant, beautiful woman the world had lost. And then I cried for myself, for the man I had been with her, the man who had died on this road alongside her. And I cried for the hollow man I had become. I cried out my guilt, my shame, my regret, letting the sounds be carried away by the wind, offering them up to the empty sky. I sank to my knees on the damp earth, my suit jacket staining with mud, and I wept until there were no tears left. I don't know how long I stayed there. Time had ceased to have meaning. When I finally stood up, my legs aching, the sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the road. Something inside me had shifted. The guilt was still there. The pain was still there. But they no longer owned me. By facing the absolute worst of it, by looking into the abyss, I had somehow found a strange, quiet peace. I had finally truly hit the bottom, and there was nowhere to go but up. I knew then what my final move had to be. It was no longer about getting Liam to forgive me. It was about setting him free. Free from the burden of my truth, free from the poison of his own hate. I drove back to the city, not to my sterile apartment, but to a simple stationery store. I bought a single sheet of fine cream-colored paper and a good pen. Back in my apartment, I sat at my drafting table, the table where I had designed so many futures for strangers, and I began to write a letter to my son. This would be my final blueprint. A design for a demolition. A plan to tear down the last rotten wall between us, even if it meant I would be buried in the rubble. Of course. Here is Act 3, Part 1. I sat at the drafting table for a long time before I wrote the first word. The blank page was intimidating. It was a void, but it was also a possibility. My entire life, I had filled pages like this, with lines, angles, and calculations, the precise language of structure and order. But this letter required a different language, one I was still learning to speak, the language of the heart. My hand, usually so steady when holding a pen, felt clumsy and foreign. I wasn't designing a building. I was attempting to dismantle one. The prison of resentment I had built around my son and the fortress of guilt I had built around myself. This wasn't a blueprint for construction. It was a letter of surrender. I took a deep breath and began to write. Liam, I am writing this letter with no expectation that you will read it, and certainly with no expectation of a reply. I am writing it because after 20 years of silence and a lifetime of mistakes, it is the only honest thing I have left to give you. I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness. I know now that I have no right to ask for that. Forgiveness is a gift, and I am not worthy of receiving it. I am writing this to give you something else, your freedom. For your entire life, my failure has been a shadow that has followed you. My absence, my grief, my guilt, they became your inheritance. a burden that no child should ever have to carry. When I told you the truth about the day your mother died, I thought I was giving you an explanation. I see now with a clarity that devastates me that all I did was add an unbearable weight to the load you were already carrying. It was the last and most selfish act of a selfish man, and for that, I am truly deeply sorry. I want you to know that the anger and hatred you feel toward me is justified. It is earned. You have every right to feel it. But I am begging you not for my sake, but for yours and for Chloe's, and for the sake of the beautiful life you are building. Please do not let that anger be the foundation of your future. It is a toxic ground to build on. It will poison everything you love. I know this because I have spent 2 decades living on a similar foundation of guilt, and it has turned me into a ghost. You don't have to forgive me to let go of the hate. You just have to decide that your future is more important than my past. You have to choose happiness over bitterness. You have to choose Chloe over the memory of my mistakes. She is your future. She is your home. Don't let me be the reason that home crumbles. I release you, Liam. I release you from any obligation you might feel from any connection that brings you pain. The man you called Dad died a long time ago. Let him rest. Don't let his ghost haunt the new life you are so deservedly building. I will not be at your wedding. I will not call. I will not intrude on your life again. My only wish is that one day you will be able to think of your mother without my shadow falling across her memory. She was sunlight, and she deserved a world full of it. I have always loved you, even when I was too broken to show it. And I am so proud of the man you have become, not because of me, but in spite of me. David. I read the letter over and over. The words were simple, direct. There were no excuses, no justifications, just the plain, unvarnished truth of my failure and a desperate plea for him to save himself from it. It was the most honest thing I had ever written. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote his name on the front. I drove to his apartment building, the letter sitting on the passenger seat like a physical weight. The lights were on in their unit. I could imagine them inside, perhaps sitting in silence, the air thick with the thing they couldn't talk about. My heart ached for them. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't want a confrontation. This letter was not the start of a dialogue. It was an ending. I slid the envelope under their door, my fingers brushing against the cool metal. It was a final, quiet act. I walked away without looking back, feeling a strange sense of lightness. I had done the only thing I had left to do. I had removed myself from the equation. The days leading up to the wedding were the longest of my life. I kept my promise. I didn't call. I didn't text. I tried to fill my days to create a new routine that wasn't centered on waiting. I went for long walks through the city, reacquainting myself with the streets and parks. I visited the library and checked out books on subjects other than architecture. I tried to learn how to simply be, how to be David, a man living in a quiet apartment, not David, the failed father. The day of the wedding arrived, a perfect, brilliant Saturday in late spring. The sky was a piercing, cloudless blue. A Sarah kind of day. I woke up knowing that somewhere across town, my son was putting on a tuxedo. Chloe was stepping into a white dress. Their families were gathering. A celebration was beginning, and I was not a part of it. The pain of it was sharp and specific, but it was clean. It was the pain of a necessary amputation. I put on a suit. I didn't know why. It felt like an act of respect, of bearing witness from afar. I couldn't go to the wedding, but I couldn't let the day pass in my usual sweatpants and t-shirt. It was a sacred day. Instead of going to the church, I drove to the cemetery. The grounds were quiet and beautifully kept, the green lawns dotted with granite and marble. I hadn't been here in years. It was another place I had avoided, another place too heavy with the past. I bought a small bouquet of Sarah's favorite flowers, freesias, from a vendor near the gate. Their scent was a memory in itself. I found her grave easily. The headstone was simple, elegant. Sarah Ann Parker, loving wife and mother. The dates of her life seemed impossibly short. I knelt down and placed the flowers in the small vase set into the stone. I traced the letters of her name with my finger. "Hello, Sarah," I whispered, my voice rough. It's been a while. Too long. I told her everything. I sat there on the soft grass, the warm sun on my back, and I talked to her as if she were sitting right beside me. I told her about Liam, about how strong and successful he had become. I told her about Chloe, about how perfect she was for him, how she had her mother's warmth and wisdom, and I told her how I had failed them both. I confessed my guilt, my absence, my selfishness. I told her about the letter. I let him go, Sarah. I said the tears I thought I'd run out of coming again. I had to save him. I hope it was the right thing to do. I sat there for a long time, sharing the silence with her. The sun began its slow descent, the light turning golden and soft. The time for the wedding ceremony would have passed. They would be husband and wife now, a new family, officially born. I felt a pang of profound loss, but also a sense of peace. I had done what I could. The rest was up to him. Just as I was thinking of leaving, a sound made me turn my head. Footsteps on the grass. I looked up and my heart stopped. It was Liam. He was in his tuxedo, the jacket unbuttoned, the tie slightly loosened. He looked exhausted and sad, but he was here. He stopped a few feet away from me, his eyes on his mother's grave, then on the fresh flowers. He didn't seem surprised to see me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't angry or tense. It was heavy with everything that had passed between us, but it was a shared silence. I read your letter, he said finally, his voice quiet. He looked at me, his eyes so much like hers were clear and searching. I got it the morning after you left it. I just nodded, unable to speak. He took a step closer. After I read it, I went to Chloe. I told her everything. Everything you told me, everything in the letter. I finally talked about it. He looked down at the grass. We almost called off the wedding. The words were a punch to the gut. Liam, I'm so sorry. No, he said, cutting me off gently. Let me finish. He took a breath. We talked all night, and Chloe said something. She said that my whole life I've been looking at you as the man who ruined my past. She said maybe it's time to start looking at you as a man who is trying to save my future. He paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. I spent my whole life hating a ghost dad, a one-dimensional villain. But you're not a ghost. You're just a man, a broken man, just like me. He knelt down beside me, his tuxedo trousers creasing on the damp grass. He reached out and touched the headstone, his fingers next to mine. I came here to talk to her, he said, his voice thick with emotion. To tell her I got married, and to tell her, I think I'm starting to understand. He looked at me, and for the first time in 20 years, I didn't see anger, or pity, or disappointment in his eyes. I saw a flicker of something else, something fragile and new and tentative. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was recognition. He was seeing me, David. The man, not Dad, the failure. We sat there together, father and son, at the grave of the woman we both loved, the woman who connected us in both grief and love. The sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. We didn't say much more. We didn't need to. The silence was no longer an absence of words, but a presence of shared understanding. A foundation cracked and broken was finally being cleared, making way for something new to be built. It wouldn't be the same as it was before. It would be different, scarred, but maybe strong enough to stand. The sky bled from orange to a deep bruised purple. The first stars began to prick the twilight. We sat in that shared silence, two men in suits on the cool grass, until the air grew chilly. The day was over. The wedding was over. And something new, something undefined and fragile, was just beginning. Finally, Liam pushed himself to his feet, brushing the grass from his trousers. I followed suit, my joints stiff. The moment felt delicate, like a soap bubble. I was terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing, of shattering it. Chloe's waiting, he said, not looking at me. We have a reception to get to. He paused, his back to me as he looked at the headstone one last time. She would have loved today. She would have been so happy. Yes, I said, my voice thick. Yes, she would have. He turned then and faced me fully. The space between us felt charged with unspoken potential. I expected him to say goodbye, to walk away, and leave me here with the ghosts. It would have been enough. The conversation we'd had was more than I had ever hoped for. It was a grace I didn't deserve. But he didn't leave. He stood there wrestling with a thought. I could see it in the tension of his jaw, the slight furrow of his brow. My letter, I said, breaking the silence, needing to give him an out. I meant what I said, Liam. You don't owe me anything. You're free. I know, he said quickly. He shoved his hands in his pockets. The thing is, Chloe and I were talking. There's a first dance, and then there's supposed to be a father-daughter dance. He looked away toward the darkening horizon. Chloe's dad is a great guy. But her biological father? He was never in the picture. He left when she was a baby. I frowned, confused. I didn't understand the relevance. Liam brought his gaze back to me. His eyes were shining with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. She's always felt that absence. He continued, his voice quiet but clear. A father-shaped hole, she calls it. And she said she didn't want our new family to start with another empty space. Not if it could be filled. My heart began to beat a little faster. A wild, impossible hope began to flicker within me. I barely dared to breathe. It's late, he said. And it's not the church. It's not the ceremony, but the party is just getting started. He took a small, hesitant step toward me. Chloe wants to meet the man who wrote her husband that letter. She said she thinks he might be a good man to have in her family's life. He held my gaze, and the question was there unspoken, but hanging in the air, as plainly as the moon that was beginning to rise. It wasn't a demand, it was an invitation. Tentative, fragile, an offer of a single small step across the chasm that had separated us. Tears welled in my eyes, and this time I didn't fight them. I just nodded, unable to form words. A single, grateful nod, a small smile touched Liam's lips. It was the first genuine smile he had given me in, I couldn't remember how long. It was a sad smile, but it was real. Okay, he said softly. Let's go then. We can ride together. The drive to the reception hall was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet now. A working quiet. The quiet of two architects contemplating a complex new design. We were strangers in a way, learning each other's languages again. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about the future. He asked me about a building downtown. I had designed a technical question about the cantilevered glass facade. I answered him, and for a few minutes, we were just two men talking about architecture. It was a safe bridge built on common ground. The reception was in full swing when we arrived. It was held in a beautifully restored old warehouse with exposed brick walls, soaring ceilings, and strings of fairy lights that cast a magical glow over everything. The room was filled with music, laughter, and the joyful energy of 100 people celebrating love. It was another world. As we stood in the doorway, a wave of panic washed over me. I didn't belong here. I was an intruder, a ghost from a past that had no place in this bright, happy present. But then Liam glanced at me, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, and started walking into the room. I took a deep breath and followed him. Heads turned. Conversations lulled. People saw their groom, who had been missing for over an hour, walk in with a man they didn't recognize, the man who had been pointed out as a ghost at the engagement party. And then a path cleared, and Chloe was walking toward us. She was breathtaking. She looked like an angel in her simple, elegant dress, her face radiant. But her eyes were only for Liam. She searched his face, asking a silent question. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, and her expression softened with a wave of relief so profound it was visible. Then she looked at me. Her kind, intelligent eyes held no judgment, only a deep, soulful curiosity. She walked right up to me, bypassing everyone else, and put her hands on my arms. David, she said, her voice warm and welcoming, I am so glad you're here. And with those simple words, the ghost I had been for 20 years began to feel solid again. She led me into the heart of the party, introducing me not as Liam's long-lost father, but simply as David, a friend of the family. It was a gentle re-entry, a way of allowing me to be present without having to carry the full weight of my history. The father-daughter dance began. Chloe danced with her kind stepfather, her head resting on his shoulder. I watched from the edge of the room, my heart full, and then the DJ announced it was time for the bride to dance with the groom's father. A hush fell over the room. I saw people exchange confused looks. Liam walked over to me. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, then at Chloe, who was standing in the middle of the dance floor waiting, her hand outstretched. It was an offer, a public, terrifying, beautiful offer of grace. My feet felt rooted to the spot. I can't, I whispered to Liam. I don't deserve this. It's not about what you deserve, Liam said, quietly, his hand on my shoulder. It's about what we need to start healing. He looked at Chloe. She needs this, and maybe I do too. Slowly, as if in a dream, I walked onto the dance floor. I took Chloe's hand. It was warm and strong. I placed my other hand on her waist, and she put her hand on my shoulder. The music started a soft, slow melody. Thank you, she whispered, her eyes shining with tears. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for building a bridge, I whispered back. My own voice choked with emotion. We swayed to the music, a strange and unlikely pair. The new bride and the father who wasn't. But in that moment, under the warm lights, surrounded by her family and his friends, we felt like a real family. A broken one, a complicated one, but a real one. I wasn't just a ghost anymore. I was a man holding the hand of his son's wife, taking the first step on a long, uncertain road to redemption. A few months later, on a crisp autumn Sunday, I found myself standing in Liam and Chloe's sun-drenched living room. The walls were still the pale blue he had been painting that fateful afternoon. Framed photos now hung on them. Wedding pictures. A photo of Chloe and her mother. A photo of Liam and Sarah taken years ago. And on a small side table, a new photo in a simple silver frame. It was of me, Chloe, and Liam, taken at the wedding. We were all smiling. It was a little strained, a little sad around the eyes, but it was a start. Liam handed me a cup of coffee. Chloe's making pancakes, he said. We stood by the window, looking out at the city. For a while, we didn't speak, just sipped our coffee. The silence was easy. I was thinking, Liam said, breaking the quiet. We have that old box of your drafting tools, the gift you brought to the engagement party. I nodded. I know you have no use for them. It was a silly gift. No, he said. It wasn't. He turned to face me. I was thinking, maybe you could show me how they work? Sometime. He shrugged, a casual gesture that carried immense weight. I used to love it when you'd let me draw with you. Remember, I remembered. I remembered the little boy with the superhero t-shirt, his small hand trying to guide the big compass. My heart swelled with an emotion so powerful, it almost buckled my knees. I'd like that very much, I said. He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that finally reached his eyes. He looked at me, this man who was my son, this stranger I was getting to know all over again. Okay, then, he said. He paused, just for a beat. Okay? Dad. The words spoken so simply, so quietly landed in my heart, not as a verdict or a judgment, but as a key. A key unlocking a door I thought was sealed forever. It wasn't an ending. It wasn't a perfect resolution. But it was a new foundation. A foundation built not on the rubble of the past, but on the tentative, fragile, and infinitely precious ground of hope. And we had all the time in the world to build on it.